evening and welcome from the YouTube space in New York City. I'm Elaine Quijano, your host for the next hour, as we discuss women in the first 100 days of Trump. To bring you this event, we have partnered with Clover Letter, an email newsletter for girls, some of whom are seated in our audience tonight. We've gathered a panel of women from different walks of life who have different perspectives, and they've been kind enough to sit down tonight to listen to each other's views and to share their own. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at some of the issues that matter most to them and how those issues could be shaped under the current administration. But first, a look at how women have influenced the president's first weeks in office.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
Just hours after President Trump took the oath of office, millions of women gathered to send him and the world a message. They rallied against the president's past remarks on women.
I'm not nasty, like the combo of Trump and Pence being served up to me in my voting booth.
And rallied for issues that ranged from immigration and civil rights to health care, currently the focus of an intense debate nationwide. Decisions on these issues fall to the president and the team he's selected. He named 4 women to his cabinet, the same number as President George W. Bush, and 3 fewer than President Obama. Inside the White House, Kellyanne Conway is a senior advisor. She's the first woman in American history to run a successful presidential campaign. Another top advisor?
Strong women are definitely here.
The president's daughter, Ivanka Trump. She's used her influence to place child care and women in the workplace on her father's agenda.
My administration wants to work with members of both parties to make child care accessible and affordable, to help ensure new parents that they have paid family leave.
First Lady Melania Trump vowed in the campaign to combat cyberbullying.
I'm committed to creating and supporting initiatives dear to my heart, which will have impact on women and children all around the world.
And in his recent address to Congress, the president made an appeal to all Americans.
From now on, America will be empowered by our aspirations, not burdened by our fears.
We have a lot to get to, and we have a great panel to do so. Starting at the top left, Jennifer Wallace is an award-winning freelance journalist and frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and Washington Post. Zora Ilunga-Reed is the voice behind We the People, a podcast for people who aren't old enough to vote. Scotty Nell Hughes is a conservative commentator and the political editor at RightsAlerts.com. Amani Al-Qad'atba is the founder of MuslimGirl.com and the author of Muslim Girl, A Coming of Age. Ashley Carter is the director of coalitions for the Independent Women's Voice and at-large member, D.C. State Board of Education. Nina Mariah Donovan is a performance artist and college student who wrote the Nasty Woman poem delivered by Ashley Judd at the Women's March. Ladies, first of all, thank you all so much for being here. Let me start off with reaction to the president's revised executive order on immigration. And Amani, you have really been outspoken on this. You have called this something that's created a climate of hate towards Muslims. What are the effects, as you see it, of this kind of executive action?
Absolutely. I mean, we really can't talk about women in Trump's first 100 days in office if we don't talk about the impact that his administration is having on women of color. You know, a lot of marginalized communities are being impacted right now. Women and families are being ripped apart from their children. For Muslim women especially, we have been bearing the brunt of a lot of the hateful rhetoric that elected Trump into office in the first place. For Muslim women like myself who choose to cover our heads, we are basically like the lightning rods of all this anti-Muslim bigotry taking place right now. We're one of the most visible religious minorities in the country, and as such, we are becoming victimized by an escalation of hate crimes and a lot of harassment and much of this discriminatory behavior and attitude that is really on the rise at the moment.
So let me ask you, Ashley, what do you say to someone like Amani that sees this as a contributing factor in what she calls really a fearful climate for people like her?
Well, in today's age, we've seen the rise of terrorism across not only our nation, but across the world. And I think those who are on the right are very terrified that looking at Germany, Nice, around the country, we've seen acts of terrorism facing our country and facing our world, and we don't want to have the same things going on in the United States that have happened in other places around the world.
I'm seeing an escalation of terrorism by a lot of white men, but white men aren't getting banned from our country. So to me, it's really unfair that Muslims have to pay the price, innocent Muslims have to pay the price for the individual actions of others. And for us, at MuslimGirl.com, a year ago, when this talk about a Muslim ban first started taking place, we were compelled to, for the first time since our inception, to publish a crisis safety manual for Muslim women on our website. Literally a resource just for women how to survive, telling them safety tips like never leave your homes without your phones fully charged in case you need to record someone attacking you for evidence.
Scotty, you're shaking your head.
Well, first of all, there's no place for hate against anybody. That is here we are in America. There's no place for hate. But I do have to say, yes, that's horrible what is going on. We should never target anybody based on their faith, but you cannot ignore the recent attacks that are going against those of Jewish faith and the escalating attacks of those Trump supporters. Even this past weekend at Berkeley when it came out, the violence was against Trump supporters. A mentally handicapped boy was kidnapped in Chicago and forced to drink toilet bowl water while they were cursing at him for supposedly being a Trump supporter. There is a rise of hate crimes across all boards. It's not just against one group right now, and that is the problem we need to be discussing. It's not just one group or the other. It's actually saying hate should not exist against anybody. It should be a freedom for all, not necessarily just one side. That just continues the divide instead of saying you did this, you did this. How about we're all experiencing a real problem right now, and it's up to all of us to have the solution.
Do you think our president needs to come out and say that, though? I mean, I'm not sure that I knew there was so much hate until this election, and I think it's incumbent upon the president to.
And I think that's why his speech this past week that he gave Tuesday night, I think that's why that actually did such a great job, because he spoke on issues that we all could agree on, or majority of us could agree on. He left out the polarizing issues that separate the left from the right. He talked about all Americans and putting America first, and that includes people of Jewish, Muslim, Christian, men, women, all of us making sure that we are saved and we have the ability to provide for our family. That's why that speech was such a great speech and a unifying speech that I think our country needed to hear. I'm just sad that we didn't get to focus more on it and the parts of it.
All right. Well, let me ask you about International Women's Day, because we'll be talking about certainly the other political aspects over the course of our conversation here. But International Women's Day has a theme this year of Be Bold for Change. And I wonder, Nina, let me start with you. What are some of the changes you think that we're seeing women advocate for? In your poetry, you talk about a number of issues, everything from wage inequality to street harassment. What are some of the things in your activism and as you kind of work to craft your art, your poems, that you see women beginning to stand up for that matters to you?
I feel like especially with my generation, we're so much more open-minded than the past ones. So things like, especially like queer rights, which is a huge issue that needs to be focused on, because transgender women of color are the most unprotected and the most unsecured women in America, but people, they want to kick them out of their own bathrooms and stuff like that, But I feel like a part of this movement, though, is spreading awareness of things like that, to women, even older women who are growing up. Maybe they weren't for gay rights growing up because of, the timeline of it all or their region. But I feel like this movement spreads the awareness of why everyone deserves equality,
Zora, what about you? Do you think there's something happening with your generation in particular where you're seeing women take a very active role, voicing their concerns and being willing to go ahead and march and be a lot more politically active, perhaps?
Right. I mean, I completely agree. I think feminism at its root is a very multifaceted issue. It's something that connects basically everybody's different identifiers. It's not something that we can really divide along race or class lines. And I think that's what you're seeing, this sort of new feminist movement with the Women's March and, with all of these sort of smaller marches going on around the world. You're seeing people moving away from race, moving away from religion as dividers and sort of coming together as women. And I think that's really what we need to be working on in this sort of new movement that we're seeing.
Let's go ahead and take a look back. We have a bite to play here, some highlights from the Women's March.
When we elect a possible president, we too often go home. We've elected an impossible president. We're never going home.
Are you ready to shake up the world? We can do it if women rise up.
Continue to embrace the things that make you unique, even if it makes others uncomfortable.
I am a nasty woman.
No hate, no bigotry, no Muslim registry. I stand here before you, unapologetically Muslim American.
We will not give up our right to safe and legal abortions,
including the fight to be recognized as individuals who know better for ourselves what is right for our bodies, better than any elected official, popular or otherwise.
We will not ask our LGBTQ families to go backwards.
We are not a fluke. This is not a singular phenomenon. We are fantastic and fabulous. And this is only the beginning.
So a number of issues discussed at the Women's March. So Amani, what happens now?
I mean, I think it's definitely incumbent upon women especially to come together to push back against, the status quo that's alienating a lot of us. To try to equate, hatred that Trump supporters are receiving with the systemic racism in our country that Trump exploited in a way that just so adversely harms women today, I think it is really just ridiculous. And I think it really is our emancipation when we come together through the spirit of sisterhood, especially knowing that we as women are really facing a lot of the same frameworks of hostility and oppression right now. I think that will be our emancipations coming together.
Nina, it's interesting. Amani talks about sisterhood. Where does this movement, though, leave, for instance, anti-abortion activists who may oppose President Trump but did not necessarily feel welcome at the Women's March? Is there a place for them?
I mean, it is a shame to kick anyone out of an equality march, because that's, it's about equality and having that open mind, to everyone. So I wish, even women who don't agree with every single, maybe modern feminist ideal, I do want them to be included, because this needs to depend on, mature, calm, open conversations rather than just attacking everyone all the time, So I think it's more of maybe how you protest abortion or, how you're for it.
I think the big thing is we no longer live in a Leave It to Beaver society where we're all cookie cutters. In fact, looking at this room, I guarantee we do not agree on 100% of all things. And that's a good thing. That's called diversity. We should be celebrating it. I had a real problem with that march. I was there that day and I had my 10-year-old son with me. And I am all for girl power. I believe that could have been a very beautiful experience, a wonderful experience. But it turned into such a hateful experience because I was listening to some of the rhetoric and then some of the signs and some of the things. I had to explain to my son what a woman was wearing on her head, and it was not a cute kitty cat knitted hat. It was other things that a 10-year-old boy should not be able to know about. And then expect him to go back to his classroom the next day and look at the girls in his class knowing that they had that body part. Not something that I wanted. It was very hard for me. The words that they were saying and they were screaming at, and because of who I am, the words that they were screaming at me. Mom, why are other women calling you those names? We tore each other down that day as well, all in the name of supposed love with each other. So it was okay to be, as long as you agreed with them, that was great, you got to march. But if you didn't, you were just as hated as anyone else.
Well, I would say that when they're using the words that you heard, they were quoting our president.
No,
but I'm just
right. It was 15 years ago.
But I would agree with you.
But they didn't have the hat on or have the full body part. That was not what our suffragettes fought for. That was not what they were going with.
I agree with you, and I agree with you that to be a feminist, right, to be a full feminist is to give every woman an equal voice. And women's equality, that's what feminism is. We can't pick and choose our feminists.
Unfortunately, we saw, though, during the Women's March that women who didn't believe every single thing that the sponsors of the Women's March believed in were left aside. If you did not believe in abortion, you were not allowed to march. If you were against our president, but you were conservative and believed in some of the immigration bans, then you were not allowed to march. And unfortunately, women are not a monolithic voting bloc. Women have different viewpoints and they believe in many different things. We do need to come together and have true discussions about all of these issues, because we see that there are not just women's issues. All issues are women's issues. We also talk about women as being modern feminists. And when Kellyanne Conway was asked about being a modern feminist, she was actually Twitter and the dictionary came back and trolled her.
Well, let's go ahead and play what Kellyanne Conway said about being a feminist. This was at CPAC. Take a listen.
I don't know about calling yourself a feminist. For me, it's difficult for me to call myself a feminist in the classic sense because it seems to be very anti-male, and it certainly is very pro-abortion in this context. And I'm neither anti-male or pro-abortion. So there's an individual feminism, if you will, that you make your own choices. Mercedes, I look at myself as a product of my choices, not a victim of my circumstances. And that's really, to me, what conservative feminism, if you will, is all about.
Ashley, what do you want to say?
I am 100% in agreement with her. I consider myself a modern feminist as an elected official. I want to embrace all of the choices that women make, whether that's leaning in the boardroom or leaning into motherhood. I am a product of the choices that I make, not playing victim to being a woman and the outside influences around me.
Zora, I'm curious what you think as you sit here listening to all of this. What's going through your mind?
Right. Well, I think there's this big misconstruction about feminism that's been occurring recently in media and just in conversations that people have been having, which is that it's some sort of man-hating movement. It's some sort of, victimized way of looking at oneself. And I think what we really need here is sort of like going back to the real definition of feminism, which is someone who believes in equal rights and having, everybody really have equal rights. And I apologize for whatever happened at the Women's March with, both of you. And as far as I know, and I went to the one in DC, there was no one who was really prevented from marching. It was more of a, everybody was there. There were people who couldn't walk who came. There were little children who were on their dad's shoulders who came. Everybody came out. And so I didn't notice anyone who was prevented. And I think, there are these different political issues that come into feminism, pro-choice versus pro-life, that sort of thing. But fundamentally, I think we can all agree we believe in men and women having equal rights. And I think that's what this march was really about, even if it might have been misconstrued by the media and by other people.
All right, clearly we have so much to talk about, but we're going to take a quick break right now. When we return, we're going to talk education, and we're going to discuss what it means to have equality in the workplace. Stay with us.
still run the world. And I'm not sure it's going that well. I feel like we might be able to do a little bit better. And more importantly, I think we really suffer from a tyranny of low expectations.
men are 30% more likely than women to get that first very critical promotion to manager. That sets us on the path to leadership. And I think there's a misunderstanding out there that, women rise and rise and rise and then they don't get that top job in the end. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the paths for men and women are splitting, and they're splitting early. It's in the business interest of our country and our companies for people to think about this. Study after study, result after result shows us what we already know, which is when you use the full talents of the population, you get better results. This means that every company that can hire, retain, and use the full talents, hear the voices of women, is going to outperform its peers.
That was Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg speaking at a Wall Street Journal event. We now want to steer the conversation towards women in the workplace. And Jennifer, let me start with you, because the numbers from leanin.org show that women hold less than 30% of roles in senior management. First of all, why is that? And what do you think can be done to change that?
Well, I think it's interesting. I did a little math over the weekend, and in the top 5 positions of Fortune 500 companies, we actually are represented in less than 15%. And in terms of CEOs, we are less than 5%. And it actually goes across government as well. Men also not only rule the workplace, they rule the government. In Congress, mayors of major cities, Supreme Court justices, we are 50% of the population, and we are underrepresented everywhere. The women of our generation, the Gen X women, we didn't encounter this bias, this discrimination that maybe our parents did. But what we are seeing now is what's called secondary bias. And Sheryl Sandberg talks about this. It is an unconscious bias. It's a bias that even Sheryl Sandberg talks about, I believe, in that speech, giving a speech about this to Facebook. She said at the end of her speech, "I'll take 2 more questions." And the questions were asked. The women put down their hands, the men kept their hands up, and she kept asking the questions. And she realized this after the fact, that even Sheryl Sandberg has unconscious bias. So what do we need to do to get beyond this? I think we need to recognize it. I think the women in Gen X need to embrace the parental leave that we have. The men need to embrace the parental leave that they're afforded. We need to be talking about normalizing work-life balance, and I think the millennials should be fighting for more parental leave, because at some point you're going to be having kids, and it's our job to take the time, and it's our job to talk about it and start leveling the playing field. 71% of mothers are now working outside the home, and we don't have workplace policies in place to support the new terrain.
Millennials, what do you think about that? Zora, you nodded your head just now.
Well, I completely agree. I think we definitely need more parental leave, more child care policies. Even before a child is born, I definitely think we need more help with abortions and help with that sort of choice that's made there. And we've all just sort of read the new policy, which is that Planned Parenthood can keep its funding as long as it gets rid of its abortion sort of aspect. So I think that making sure that, from womb to whatever, to getting back into your job, there should be complete support from the government and from businesses.
Complete support for yourself, though. That's the whole side of it. And I agree that we need more women in power, and it's not the same as it was. Women, my mother's generation could be a nurse or a teacher, and that was all their options. Now you do have both people in the home working, and we're adjusting. I agree, we're going through a societal change. But let's not underplay how wonderful it is to be a mother, and what a great job that is to raise children and to be able to pass that along. And I think, unfortunately, so many times this conversation is not focusing on how wonderful it is to have a mother and a father, but it's still the mother there within the home being active as well within our children's lives. I agree we need more support for it, but let's not continue. And sometimes I think women at home who are staying at home feel like they're the ones being insulted by saying that it's not a great enough job for them to be at home raising their kids as well.
I don't think that there's necessarily a connection, right? Like, giving women in the workplace ample rights and the ability to do their work isn't necessarily negating motherhood either. They're not mutually exclusive to one another. And honestly, this type of inequality for women exists in many industries, in many fields. I'm a newly published author. I'm a first-time author. And one study that I read about in the time leading up to the publication of my book was one conducted on over 700 book reviews in mainstream publications. And this study found that a fraction of those book reviews were written about books written by women. And then of those numbers, only 3 were written by women that looked like me. So especially we have to talk about, I think, what women of color have to endure, because for women of color, leaning in the workplace isn't enough. For women of color, there are so many more barriers to even get into the room to lean in the first place. They have to kick down doors. They have to really just jump through windows, jump through hoops to be able to get to certain places. And I think that is often neglected from the conversation. And even now, I think under the current administration, that's something that seems to be empowered even more.
But do you really want a job just because you're a female or you have some sort of demographic? I don't want that. I don't ever want a job because I want it because I am the best person qualified for that job based on my resume, based on my activity, that a boss wants me for that job, not because I'm a female and they just need to fill that affirmative action / I'm afraid that's where we're moving with on this conversation. Like, oh, she got it because she was a female. No, I got it because I'm the best person for this job. And I fear that's where our conversations are now going, where people are going, oh, okay, I'm just going to check off I got my female box, unless we are a little bit better with that.
Sometimes the person who is the best for the job isn't even in the room to get interviewed in the first place. So it's not about giving a pass to people.
You can't necessarily say that. I think
I'm saying it now more than ever.
Discrimination. You don't have that kind of discrimination going on.
Of course,
male versus female.
There is structural inequality like that.
To back it up. There is research to back it up. But I also think there are a lot of women who don't have the option to stay home. So what about the majority
of it that goes with it?
The majority of women don't actually have the option to stay home.
Whether or not you have the option to stay at home or not, why is it upon the government to provide resources such as paid leave? Why is it not upon your business that you're working for to talk to them?
It hasn't been mandated.
We don't need universal health care or universal paid leave. What we need is to have real serious conversations with businesses. And when you put barriers on, such as universal paid leave, you're actually having problems with businesses that are going above and beyond the set minimums with our government.
Let's turn to another issue, because this notion, obviously, of child care and staying at home versus working outside the home is one we could talk about forever, really. It's a debate that's been going on, but I want to turn to equal pay, because Jennifer, we've seen people advocating for equal pay for years, but at the same time, do you think there is really the potential for that issue of equal pay to rise to the level of being the top of the national priority list or discourse?
I think it's one of the equal pay issue in and of itself is very controversial, right? It's been. Some studies have debunked it. There is an issue. There is a discrepancy. I'm glad you didn't quote the numbers that are often now debunked. It is an issue. I think it's one of a myriad of issues, though. I think equal pay, when we don't have women in positions of power deciding how much we're paying, this is the result of it. And again, I'm not looking at men who are in the positions of power as the enemy. I think they are. I think we need to embrace them and bring them into the feminist movement. This is not something women can do on their own. Obviously, we have men in the government making these decisions. We have men at the top of the corporate ladders making these decisions. We need to come together and stop telling men to check their privilege at the door in a dismissive way. I think there's a better way of having these conversations with men.
What do you think about that, Nina?
Well, also people like to leave out the fact that women of color they face the most gender gap or wage gap based on gender. That's my train of thought. But also it's the fact that people do debunk it, though, and they do debunk the fact that, like you were saying, women of color sometimes don't even get the foot in the door. Because they see, it's a really ethnic name on the resume, so they just toss it aside because, if it's going to be some crazy name, like they like to say, it doesn't sound professional, So that's another huge problem here.
Nina, what about what Jennifer brought up, the notion that you need to have allies? Obviously, you need to have men on your side. Do you see this being something that, for instance, in your generation, that millennials are talking about things like this in a more open way, direct way?
Definitely. Definitely, because you saw men at the marches too. It wasn't just a women's march; it was an everyone march. And especially with my generation, we're definitely changing. The social scripts that come with gender, that come with acting a lady or acting like a man. We're definitely changing the way we talk about it, and even the fluidity that many people see with gender and sexuality.
Let's turn to the topic of education, because this is something that's been such a key issue, really important issue, and one that President Trump has made it a point to mention. Let's go ahead and take a listen to some recent comments from the president.
As I've often said in my address to Congress and just about any place else I can speak, education is the civil rights issue of our time. And it's why I've asked Congress to support a school choice bill. And we've come a long way. I think we're really we're right out there, and we're ahead of schedule in so many ways when it comes to education. And again, Betsy's going to lead that. You're going to lead that charge, right? You're going to do a fantastic job.
Ashley, let me start with you. You are a supporter of school choice. Tell me why.
I am a proponent of school choice. I serve in D.C. government on the Board of Education, and yet I believe that we should embrace school choice because it empowers parents. It empowers parents to make the best decisions for their children, whether that's traditional public school, charter schools, homeschooling, religious schooling, or online schooling. We embrace them all. Those are all choices, and no, all children don't learn in a one-size-fits-all all box. We want to embrace parents, and we want to embrace families to make the best choices for their children.
Jenny, what do you think about that?
Well, this is an issue that we could like all
about
the
for
other
hours.
issues we could talk about for hours. I mean, I think obviously the risks are taking resources out of public education. I mean, I do believe in parent choice, but I also it's a slippery slope.
I think this is an olive branch issue. I think this is one of those issues that we can find a good foundation to build unity on between Republican and Democrats. I think majority, even teachers can agree, Common Core right now has some major issues where the focus is on teaching a test rather than teaching life. I think there's a lot of, I think this is one of the issues why President Trump did better in demographics he was expected to do bad on. Because Hillary Clinton, I think, did not go into the areas of the Hispanics community or the urban areas and talk about education, if it more focused on splitting, and rather on what her plan was for educating and putting money back into those local school programs. I think it's secondary to the Pentagon and to the Department of Defense. Education was probably one of the most important positions that President Trump had to pick one of his members for.
When you look at school choice, oftentimes the charter school and school choice movements in cities have been started by parents of African American or Latino who have Latino families, because the traditional public schools were failing. They were low performing, and that's why we have seen an uptick and an embrace of school choice methods. When you took a look at budgetary issues and taking money away from traditional public education, the opposite end of the coin is, shouldn't the money follow the child as opposed to dumping money into more school public traditional schools? If the money follows the child, you can have the best education.
All right. Well,
I mean, what children is the money following? Because in a situation like this, it's really just, Democrats and Republicans can come together on this, but it is the most privileged Democrats and Republicans that can come together on this. I think that it truly neglects underprivileged families. It neglects people who are on the lower income side of things. It absolutely does deplete resources from children who don't have a choice, that have to attend public school, that can't afford to go to a charter school. And of course, yes, that means that charter schools are going to perform better. Of course that means that. Like, there are public schools in inner cities that have horrible, that are just horrible for children, but we're not putting resources into those schools. We're instead taking resources away from them even more, and really just making education even more exclusionary. And I think that is really such a shame.
Well, we'll see if, in fact, folks in Washington manage to find some common ground over this issue. We're going to keep our discussion going in just a moment. For now, though, a quick break. Much more from our panel when we return. Welcome back once more from the YouTube space in New York City. I'm Elaine Quijano alongside our panel, and so much to get to. Let's turn to the topics of gender equality and healthcare. And I want to start with transgender rights, because Nina, this is something that you talked about earlier on. This is an issue that has continued to be in the news, the issue of transgender rights. Recently, there was the Trump administration's decision to withdraw Obama-era guidelines. That drew the attention of Caitlyn Jenner. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that bite.
I have a message for the bullies. You're sick. And because you're weak, you pick on kids, you pick on women or anyone else you think is vulnerable. Apparently, even becoming the Attorney General isn't enough to cure some people of their insecurities. As proof, the Supreme Court will soon hear a very important Title IX case, thanks to the courage of a very brave young man, Gavin Grimm. Mr. President, we'll see you in court. Finally, I have a message for President Trump from, well, one Republican to another. This is a disaster, and you can still fix it. You made a promise to protect the LGBTQ community. Call me.
So, Nina, today the Supreme Court said that they would not hear that case. I know you feel strongly about this. What's your reaction?
Well, I hate the fact that he says he wants to propose that, transgender bathroom bill because he cares about his citizens and the safety of them. In reality, transgender people face the most harassment and violence out of anyone, even not just from cisgender or straight people, but from people within the queer community, so they're facing it from both sides, and even transgender women, they're 7 times more likely to face hate violence crimes, and transgender women of color are 6 times more likely to face crimes than most. And he wants to talk about, somebody could go in there and be sexually assaulted by someone who identifies as trans. But transgender women are almost twice as likely to be sexually assaulted. So who really needs the safety here? If you make these, if someone who appears as a woman walks into, a men's bathroom, how is that going to look? Most likely they're going to be attacked. And people like to base it on, private parts or whatever. But what happens if a transgender person happens to get bottom surgery? What's your opinion on that? If you're really about, it's all private parts. Like I said before, they are the most in danger, yet they're viewed as the enemy, and it makes no sense to me.
Zora, you're nodding your head over there. It's interesting. Nina brings up the point that there is even discrimination within the gay community against people who identify as transgender.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, there's no excuse for this at this point. If someone makes a claim that they'd like to promote equality or help the LGBTQ plus community, then I really think this is the issue that you can't change the fact that people will identify the way they will identify and use the bathroom of their choice. I think it's one of those fundamental rights that I'm always surprised to see in the news, because it just seems like such a basic decision. I would like to use the bathroom where I would like to use the bathroom. That shouldn't be up to my president or my elected representative. It should be up to me. And so I think that's really where the issue falls.
Ashley, she calls it a fundamental right. How do you see it?
I see it as an issue that I feel for both children who are facing this in our schools. We want all of our children to have equitable resources, to have equality. So it's something that I believe that needs to be dealt with on an individual basis, an individual district, an individual school. We really need to look at the policies that we're making and making sure that it's best for all of our students.
Scotty, what about you?
I think this is where the 10th Amendment comes in. I think this is where President Trump's stance was. Put it back to the community, to their answers. But recently there was an issue. There's actually a logistical issue that's starting to arise. We saw there was a case in Texas where a transgender male wrestled in the female division and won and beat all the girls, and now has the college scholarships, got all the awards that go with it. And there is a physical difference between male and female bodies at different points. I think this is going to open up a lot of questions that are going to need to be answered, so that we're not kind of self-defeating because girls competing against boys just because they need access to a college scholarship in some cases. I think that's opening up a road that we don't need to go down.
Let's turn to the issue over funding Planned Parenthood, because this is something that we heard a lot about during the campaign, certainly. And this was essentially a rallying cry, right? On the one hand, you had Republicans talking about defunding Planned Parenthood. You have Democrats vowing to protect it. I wonder if, Amani, you think this is an issue that'll be a flashpoint in the year to come, or do you think that this is, given the other issues that we're seeing, this is something that is not necessarily going to get as much attention?
I really don't think that if the women are going to have a say about it, that this is going to be an issue that goes away. I think that it's really important for us to think about preserving the sanctity of womanhood right now, of our livelihoods. And that's something that is getting thrown under the bus. You know, it's really important to support women's choice, their autonomy to their bodies. And that is something that I feel every woman is entitled to. And it's important for our government to not impede on that, right? I mean, it's one thing to not create policies in support of that, let alone to create policies making it an even more detrimental situation for us. And I think it's completely hostile and unnecessary.
Well, let's go take a listen to Kellyanne Conway, who talked about this issue recently. Let's take a listen.
Why are we here? What does it mean to stand together, to be part of this incredible movement, to face criticism, ridicule, laws and lawmakers that diminish and erode our most basic right and the bedrock of our society? It means to protect and to promote the most precious gift in the world, the gift of life.
All right, that, of course, was Kellyanne Conway at the March for Life. So obviously, Scotty, you would agree with Kellyanne Conway there and see it very differently.
Absolutely, because I believe that life begins at conception, and I am fighting for the future life of women and men and those babies that are being aborted. And if you talk about family planning, we have a lot of options today that we might not have had 10, 20 years ago. You do have birth control that is available. You have other ways of taking care of planning for family planning. And abortions, unfortunately, and the funding, and it's not, we can't legally fund Planned Parenthood. I get it. But I do believe that the money that we give as the federal government to Planned Parenthood is reallocated to where eventually the abortions are covered. It's just against our fundamental. We have as much right to believe that life begins at birth as anybody else believes that it doesn't believe until actually that first breath of air is taken.
You made the point that we all have access to contraception now, which is true. A majority of low-income women rely on Planned Parenthood, and
they can go to the county health department. Every single county in this country, you have a county health department that it does have that has free birth control. So there are options besides Planned Parenthood.
Birth control doesn't always work, though. Well, that's not always the situation. Like, what about women that are rape victims?
You can always,
but if we're talking about,
they're still pro-life. If a child,
what about being pro-life for women that are grown women that need this type of service?
We're finding people are using abortions as a choice of birth control. They're killing a life. And to those of us that are fundamental Christians, those of us that are women of faith, or even those of us that just believe in pro-life, that is murder in our book, and we take that very seriously.
And so isn't the best prevention of abortion education?
Absolutely.
And access to contraception?
So then do it through the county and don't make abortions be the options.
But with abortions, no one wants to have an abortion. No one wakes up in the morning.
I heard that. Did I miss Hollywood? I know, but did I miss Hollywood dressing up bragging about their abortion?
Yeah, so but like I was saying, think about abortion. No one wakes up one morning and says, oh, I'm going to have an abortion. It's heartbreaking, extensive circumstances that women have to make this choice. And whether you make it legal or not, it's still going to happen. So no one wants to see, a life die, but I would rather see safe abortions happen rather than back alley abortions that kill not only the baby, but the woman as well.
Right. But what about gospel? First of all, Leah Dunham, and you have a whole slate of Hollywood celebrities that have come out and said that I wish that I had an abortion, or I wish that I'm proud of my abortion. You've had this great pop culture that's promoted abortions, but then you do have abortion doctors like Gosnell, in the Gosnell case, where he would literally pull babies out alive and murder them there.
I don't think it's abortion pride. I think it's taking the shame out of, having to make that hard choice of having an abortion.
Let me ask this, though Scotty brings up the point about what has been said by some celebrities, and Nina, I'm wondering, is that helpful when we talk about this issue, which is clearly a divisive issue in which there's very little common ground? Is that kind of rhetoric helpful when you are trying to essentially explain your point of view to folks who are, like Scotty, adamantly opposed to this?
I know people definitely need to speak out with it. Even Chelsea Handler, she's been very open about having an abortion, or I think she had 2 abortions actually. And it's stuff like that. It's like, having an abortion is not only, physically traumatizing for someone, it's also emotionally, psychologically. And so why are they shamed out of, speaking of their feelings? They have to live with this. Many of them live with regret. And why do they have to bottle all of that up?
It's real simple. Birth the baby and have an adoption. We have lots of great couples today that are looking for children in America today. That's so hard to get an adoption. That would love them.
The system is so
flawed,
though.
The adoption. Let's work together and let's reform the adoption system so that we can do that.
Is there common ground, Zora, do you think?
No, I agree. I think we'd certainly, there are a whole slew of issues we need to fix in this country. But I think when it comes down to pro-choice versus pro-life, it's really that decision. It's whether or not you want to choose to have an abortion or whether or not you want to abstain from that. Being pro-choice isn't being pro-abortion. It's not saying, I just got pregnant, I'd like to get rid of this baby. No, it's being able to have that opportunity to have that choice and to be supported when you make that decision. And I think fundamentally, I think we can all agree that we're feminists, whether modern or not, whether Kellyanne Conway feminists or not. I think we can all agree that we want to have that choice and that support. Whether or not you want to choose to have an abortion, we want to have the ability to, make that decision on our own.
But what about the baby's choice? That's what it comes down to. It's that I believe that the baby is the second at conception, that is a life, and I am here to fight for that life.
But that's your belief, though. That's your belief. Why does it have to be imposed on the entire country?
For it. And just like others fight for their beliefs of their faith.
Why does it have to be imposed on the entire country,
though? It's not. But right now, murder. The key is it is still murder in our book, and so therefore let's make sure it's not.
But would you want anyone to impose their own personal belief on everybody in an entire country?
We're dealing with life or death here. This is not just about a social issue. This is life or death here. Exactly. And so I think this is where we have this argument right now. Do I think that Roe versus Wade is going to be reversed? Probably not. Even with the Supreme Court nominee, it's already been the law. But what I do believe, though, is we have other ways of, instead of promoting and being proud, which our Hollywood celebrities like Chelsea Handler have been very proud of their abortions, need to stop making this being the case of the way to handle birth control. And instead of to handle abortions, let's talk about adoption instead.
I just have a quick question, and just we only have about 30 seconds left, I'm told, in this segment. But do you all expect anything to change on this issue? Scotty, you mentioned Roe versus Wade. You don't expect anything to change on that. But when it comes to some of these other, perhaps, avenues like Scotty mentions, where might be.
I'm afraid it'll get worse.
You think it'll get worse?
I'm afraid it'll get worse.
You think there will be less access to
absolutely.
safe and legal abortions? You do. And Scotty, do you?
I think we hopefully will have better on education. I think there'll be much more of an emphasis on educating folks of all types, of all ages, on how to properly handle this type of situation.
All right. Well, this is clearly an emotional issue, ladies. Thank you so much for your perspectives. We're going to take a quick break right now, but when we return, our panel is going to field some questions from our studio audience. Stay with us. have a few minutes left in our program, and so now we want to take some questions from our studio audience. So if you would, please say your name and to whom you are directing your question.
Hi, I'm Yi Peng, and I'm directing my question to everyone. So my question is, what do you think people who can't vote, such as green card holders and international students, do in this political climate as we are affected by this situation?
You want to start off, Amani?
Get active, definitely. I think that the hope that we're all working towards right now is that a human being's value isn't dependent on their documents or their legal status and whatnot. Every human being in the United States of America should have a voice and should feel entitled to using that voice. And I think that right now, more than anything, we're going to find our emancipation in grassroots activism. Like, it's going to come down to the people to create the change that they need to see in the world.
Ashley, do you want to weigh in?
Well, I think that one thing that President Trump has done is more of a merit-based immigration system. Listen, for the past generations, people went through Ellis Island. Family members have died on Ellis Island to get their other family member to the United States. This has been an issue. This is nothing new. And I think the point is putting America first and citizens of all faith, protecting them and giving them the ability to afford their families first, and still being open and welcoming diversity of the world. But let's know exactly who is in our country so that we can keep our country safe.
All right. Thank you for your question. Who else has a question?
Hi, this is directed toward everyone. I have a question specifically about the LGBTQI plus community. Being a member of the LGBTQ community, I feel that President Trump has repeatedly been verbally abusive in some cases, and he took down the LGBTQ support system on the website, and, you know, with the Transgender Discrimination Act being repealed, I feel that marginalized communities such as these, I was wondering what could be done to help support these communities and to get President Trump to understand some of these more complex issues within these communities.
Scotty, do you think that's a fair assessment?
Let's start. You know, obviously this is the Republican Party. This is a new frontier for the Republican Party, and President Trump was the first person who, on the RNC stage, had an openly gay individual address and to a standing ovation by the entire Republican congregation that was there. You've noticed that he once again leaves it to the communities. It's the 10th Amendment right, and he recently has done some legislation to open it up to the LGBT community. Transgender bathroom is more. That's across the board a 10th Amendment issue that he wants to put to the states for them to make their own laws for. But I just say, give it time. Don't immediately come out and just automatically assume and be hateful. Actually, wait and see. I think President Trump looks at social issues as a community-based issue, and not necessarily something that you can just blanket all at once.
You want to say something, Nina?
Yeah, I mean, he acts like he's going to protect the queer community, but his vice president, is openly homophobic, and he is for conversion therapy.
No, he's not.
He's pro conversion therapy.
That is not what that was a part of. That has been debunked. The fact is.
But regardless, symbolic gestures like having one queer speaker, for example, doesn't negate everything that he's done to harm the LGBTQI community. I think that's what the problem is, and I feel like in moments like these, it's really important for our marginalized communities, because you're right, they're marginalized communities. It's communities that are already targeted, that have been getting kicked over and over again. It's been at our expense to get this man elected, and as a result of that, these communities need to make sure that they come together. We need to have each other's backs in a moment like this. And also for us to call upon our allies to stand up for us, because it shouldn't fall on our shoulders. Like, we shouldn't have to be the ones in the face of this to have to reaffirm our humanity over and over again. It should be members of our country that are on the more privileged side of things to call their people in, to be the ones to check other people and remind them, that we need to hold down the line of what is acceptable as a society right now.
And there's so many people who say, oh, they have the right to get married now. They're safe now, they're free, but they're not. They're still being attacked, they're still being harassed. Even there's involvement, with police harassment towards transgender women as well.
All right, I'm sorry to cut this conversation short, but we are out of time. I want to thank our panelists, Amani, Zora, Ashley, Nina, Scotty, and Jennifer. And thank you to YouTube as well for allowing us to use this space. For those of you streaming us on CBSN, Vladimir Duthier will have the rest of the day's news after this short break. Thank you all for watching.
chaos in Washington following President Trump's claims that he was wiretapped by his predecessor, former President Barack Obama. The controversy putting the administration at odds with the head of the FBI, what the allegations could mean for the investigation into Russia and its possible links to the White House. The president signs a new executive order outlining changes to his controversial travel ban, as his cabinet touts the plan to Americans at home and friends abroad.
To our allies and partners around the world, please understand this order is part of our ongoing efforts to eliminate vulnerabilities that radical Islamist terrorists can and will exploit for destructive ends.
This executive order seeks to protect the American people.
But does the new version still amount to what some critics call a Muslim ban? Another show of force from North Korea, the Hermit Kingdom launching a series of ballistic missiles as a stunning new report reveals the biggest threat from Pyongyang may not come from the sky. And can public health concerns lead to an unhealthy bottom line? How a controversial tax on sugar-sweetened drinks is impacting businesses and leaving some workers with a bad taste in their mouths. CBSN starts now. Hey everyone, I'm Vladimir G2. Thanks so much for joining us. White House aides on Monday attempted to defend President Trump's explosive claim that former President Obama tapped Mr. Trump's telephones during last year's election. Now, their comments came even as FBI Director James Comey privately asked the Justice Department to dispute the allegation because he believed it was false. In an interview Monday morning, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked whether the president accepted Comey's view.
Does President Trump accept the FBI director's denial?
You know, I don't think he does, George. I think he firmly believes that this is a storyline that has been reported pretty widely by quite a few outlets. The wiretapping has been discussed in the New York Times, BBC, Fox News, and we believe that
Sarah,
it should be looked at by the House Intelligence
Sarah, I have
Committee.
got to stop you right there. Every single article you just mentioned does not back up the president's claim that President Obama had him wiretapped. Not a single one of those articles backs that up. So what is the president's evidence?
It does back up the fact that the administration was wiretapping American citizens. There was a wide reporting suggesting that his administration, whether it was directly ordered by this president specifically, his administration could have done
Sarah,
this.
I have got to stop you again. No, Sarah, I've got to stop you again because that is simply not true.
In a separate television interview, White House senior advisor Kellyanne Conway hinted that Mr. Trump may have specific intelligence backing his claim. Listen.
The President of the United States, he has information and intelligence that the rest of us do not. And that's the way it should be for presidents.
The White House has yet to release any evidence supporting the wiretap allegation. Margaret Brennan brings us back to the comments that sparked the firestorm.
I have recused myself.
It began with Attorney General Jeff Sessions' decision Thursday to recuse himself from any investigation of Russian meddling during the campaign. After revelations, he spoke twice with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. last year.
Mr. President, do you still have confidence in the Attorney General? Total.
Mr. Trump strongly disagreed with the Attorney General's decision. That same day, conservative radio host Mark Levin accused the Obama administration of using what he called police state tactics.
The incredible scandal here is the Obama administration was investigating top officials.
The White House declined to say whether the president privately consulted his advisors or spoke with President Obama about these serious allegations before publicly posting them on his Twitter feed. Vlad?
So, Margaret, since the tweets on Saturday, White House officials have come out and defended President Trump's claims. Might he be in possession of some proof that has yet to come to light?
Well, his advisor, Kellyanne Conway, told me that this is based on information the president has, but also his beliefs. But no facts have actually been presented to the public. And as president, he does have the ability, if he's in possession of information, to make it publicly available, to declassify it. And certainly something of this caliber would indeed be a serious scandal and overstepping of legal boundaries around the White House, because it's only the Justice Department that could issue a warrant for this kind of wiretapping. The president's not allowed to do so under U.S. law. And when it comes to foreign surveillance through those secret foreign surveillance court decisions here, that has to do with contact with those who are essentially considered spies, foreign surveillance. So for the president to have said these things, those two conditions would have to exist. Otherwise, he's accusing U.S. intelligence agencies of breaking the law. Again, another serious allegation.
And despite the lack of proof, Margaret, President Trump is calling on Congress to investigate this, much like he did when he talked about those illegal immigrants who voted in the election. Don't know what the status of that is. Where will this lead?
Well, once again, the White House is urging Congress to look into this. The question here is when they're asking Congress not only look into this, but also adding on these allegations of political interference in the election, it throws politics into something that those in the national security arena argue should be apolitical when it comes to what the intelligence community as a whole, all the 16, 17 different agencies within it said was a fact, which is that the Russians meddled in the election in some form or fashion by cyber hacking. So once again, that issue, which has been established as fact by the intelligence community, is now muddled by politics. And once again, a new allegation here of the sitting president accusing the former president of illegally wiretapping him, breaking U.S. laws and certainly breaking any kind of code of conduct between presidents. So those are a tremendous basket of significant allegations being thrown around here. So it's really hard to say where this goes next. But one thing is for certain, Vlad, this doesn't put to bed or in any way get rid of negative headlines in terms of tying Russian contacts and Trump team or Trump advisors during the campaign. It doesn't take it out of the headlines. It puts it back in and just adds another life to this story that the White House so badly wanted to put behind them, particularly in the wake of that difficult story with the Attorney General Jeff Sessions having to recuse himself last week because of failing to disclose contacts with the Russian ambassador.
And Margaret, while some political analysts have suggested this may all be proven to be a distraction, what damage could this do long term if these allegations are proven to be false?
Well, if you put the politics aside, because that is messy, it's going to get messier. If you just look at what President Trump needs to do in terms of relying on and working with the intelligence agencies, this is yet another difficulty here, a little more salt in that wound that they were attempting to heal between the intelligence community and the White House because of past allegations the president and then candidate Donald Trump had made, accusing intelligence agencies of being political and not being focused on national security primarily here. But it also in some ways just confuses the public about this national security issue, and it conflates a lot of very serious things here. I mean, the national security advisor to the president, Mike Flynn, was fired by this White House for not being completely transparent about his contacts with Russian officials, yet the White House is adding on to these allegations that all of this is just sort of made up or based on illegal premises. So it really muddies the water, kicks the dust up, and confuses the public, and that's never a good thing. You need the public to understand what their leadership is doing.
Margaret Brennan for us at the White House. Margaret, thank you. FBI Director Comey's push for the Justice Department to publicly reject the president's wiretapping allegation is just another example of the ongoing rift between the intelligence community and the White House. Jeff Pegues takes a closer look.
Law enforcement sources say FBI Director James Comey was angered by the president's Twitter posts. He took the unusual step of asking the Justice Department to publicly refute the claims, but so far DOJ hasn't acted.
We don't know how President Trump knows any of this.
CBS News contributor Fran Townsend led the Justice Department's FISA unit. She believes Comey is still rebuilding confidence